Hey everybody, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Duns. Today we've been reading Deuteronomy chapter number 2. We're going to get started. Now here's what you got to remember. Again, Moses is relaying the history of all that God's done prior to the events of Joshua. Now here's why I think this is important. So recently, Jenny and I were on a trip. So we found an audio book, we were going to listen to it, and we were about 2 chapters into the book. It was like a crime book or something. It was a murder mystery. And we were about 2 chapters in the book.
Did you saw
it? And I saw it. For 2 chapters, I told her, this is the killer, this is how it happened, this is how it was going to go. And I just said, that's the way it is. And then I said, hey, skip ahead to the last chapter of the book and let's see if we're right. Now, we didn't do that. We finished the book. Turns out, though, it's totally right. I ought to be a detective. But here's what we know. When you know the end of the story, at the beginning of the story, it makes the beginning of the story make sense in all of its details. Well, now that we've read Joshua at the beginning of this year, and we know what it's like to go into the promised land, the book of Deuteronomy, we can watch for all of the subtle clues and Easter eggs about us going into that land. Now, let's begin in verse number 1. It says, "Then we turned and we journeyed into the wilderness of the way of the Red Sea, and the Lord spoke to me, and we skirted Mount Seir for many days. And the Lord spoke to me, saying, you have skirted this mountain long enough, turn northward." Now, you got to remember, the Israelites had spent 40 years in the wilderness. At the point where they go into the promised land, 40 years have passed. So he's got a whole new crop of people. As a matter of fact, if you got nitpicky about this, you would understand that aside from Moses and aside from Joshua and aside from Caleb, the 3 guys that had outlived that season of life, the oldest people there would have been 57 years old. Now, here's how you know this. Because everybody 20 years and older had died in the wilderness, which means there were probably some 19-year-olds that were there, and now they've lived 38 years in the wilderness, and so now the oldest is 57 years old. Now, here's what you'll find out. They're still in the wilderness. But when you get into the wilderness of this story and you're watching all that they're going through, what's interesting is that the wilderness, just because you're in the wilderness, it doesn't mean that you can't know exactly where you are and be on the right path. Because when this story opens, we turned and journeyed into the wilderness on the way of the Red Sea as the Lord spoke to me. Typically, we view the wilderness as a place where we don't know where we're going and we have a lot of uncertainty and we have a lot of questions, and that may be. But it also doesn't mean we're outside the will of God, because that's where He sent them. And the Lord spoke to him saying, you've skirted this mountain long enough. It's time to go northward. So not only does He know where we are in the wilderness, He knows the way out of the wilderness. Now, the next thing you notice is that they were skirting the mountain of Seir. All right? That mountain was occupied by a group that will later be known as the Idumeans. But prior to that were the Edomites, and whose lineage traced all the way back to Esau. Jax, when have we last heard about Esau and the Edomites? When did we hear about that? Please tell me you know.
Obadiah.
Now, what was the purpose of Obadiah?
Basically, be nice to your family.
Be nice to your family. Well, what's the connection between the children of Israel and the children of Edom?
They're cousins.
They're cousins. So when God says to the people, He says, you've gone around this mountain. He then says later that they are you are about to pass through the territory of your brethren, the descendants of Esau who live in Seir, and they will be afraid of you. Therefore, watch yourselves carefully. Do not meddle with them, for I will not give you any of their land, no, not so much as 1 footstep, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. So, this is the opposite view that Edom had of Israel in the book of Obadiah that we talked about on Sunday. You read it last Friday. We talked about it on Sunday. Israel is told, don't mess with them, don't scare them, don't get in their way, because I have given them their... Now listen, did they earn it? No. Just like Israel did not earn the promised land. God's grace to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, gave all of these descendants their land. Now, Jax, what else you got about that?
Okay, so God obviously He created everything, because that's like basically like if you believe that, you can believe anything else in the Bible. So basically, God also created the concept of a family and like a brotherhood, and so we see the children of Esau and the children of Jacob. And so, just like their ancestors, Jacob and Esau, they're like these rival tribes. But God is telling the Israelites to refrain from taking their land or anything they have or messing with them, because God has this like setup where family is family, and you gotta like be good to your family.
That's right. So if you have a brother or maybe two brothers, you should like be good to your brothers, right? That would be the takeaway.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be a takeaway. Like something we should remember and something we should practice.
That's definitely somebody should remember.
Somebody should. Maybe I don't know. Maybe you. Okay. Here's a couple of things extra I like. Look in verse 7. For the Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hand. He knows you're trudging through the great wilderness. These 40 years, the Lord has been with you, and you have lacked nothing. Listen, we see the power of God there and His provision. So He's got 1 million Israelite people walking through the wilderness, and they lack nothing. And so still the same God we love and we serve and we obey, and we're followers of His and we're children of His. If God sees them and knows them and takes care of them, and He doesn't change, then we can believe He sees us, He knows us, He hears us, and He will take care of us too. The other side is whenever you get into the latter end of this chapter, you get into Israel's first real battle with another army that on paper they should have lost to. This was a pretty impressive army that they're fighting. But I want you to notice verse 24. The end of verse 24 says, begin to possess it and engage him in battle. Verse 25, this day I will begin to put the dread and the fear of you upon all the nations under heaven, who shall hear the report of you. You shall tremble, and they shall be in anguish because of you. This fear that God was going to start letting the other nations fear about Israel would protect them, but it would also give them an advantage when they would go in and go to battle. We see that this works because Rahab hears about this battle, and she said everybody in her city, everybody in Jericho is afraid because they know the Lord has given them the land. This is God, again, setting up pieces to this puzzle that He's going to do. Then in verse 31, as the Lord said to me, see, I have begun to give you Sihon and his land over you. Begin to possess it that you may inherit the land. Notice how many times you're going to hear the word begin in this chapter. See, everybody likes the security of finishing something. But I'm going to tell you where the beginning of faith is when you start. Anybody can look back on something that's already happened and see it with faith because there it is. But real faith is at the beginning of something where you do it just because God says to do it, and you do it anyway. Even when it looks stacked against you, and even when it looks difficult, and even when it looks overwhelming, when God says, begin this process, you just say, yes, Lord, because I trust you. This is going to go into the New Testament. One of my favorite stories in the New Testament. Do you remember when the fishermen are out on the water and they've been fishing all night? And Jesus walks up on shore at the calling of Peter. And do you remember that story where Jesus says, throw your net over on the other side of the boat? What do they say?
They say, we already tried that like 1,000 times, so we'll do it anyway.
They say, we fished all night and we've caught nothing, but because you say so, we will do it. And there was such a great catch and such a great provision, it only came from Him. Listen, the rest of the victory in this story also only comes from Him. So let's keep reading. We'll read with some anticipation on what God's going to do next. We'll see you then in chapter 3. Bye.